A figure stands before a single steady flame. It does not roar, it watches. And in the silence it asks, what in you must burn before what is real can appear? This is not content for the merely curious. It is a demand, an invitation to the first operation of inner alchemy, mental calcination. Calcination is the fire phase, a controlled, deliberate burning of everything borrowed, rehearsed, and convenient. The opinions you inherited, the identities you perform, the certainty you cling to because the world feels too loud to doubt. In an age of endless feeds, performance culture, and manufactured outrage, the seeker's crisis is not ignorance. It is saturation, too many voices, too many truths, too little direct seeing. The fire is not punishment, it is precision. If you stay with it, you will lose what you cannot keep and keep what you cannot lose. So the work begins where comfort ends, not by adding knowledge, but by subtracting noise, until only the unburnable remains. Inside you. The ancients described this process with furnaces and metals, but the substance they truly worked on was always the same, the human soul, where early alchemists reduced ore into ash to reveal what was hidden within it. The modern practitioner reduces the psyche belief by belief, mask by mask, until only the raw material of awareness remains. Not personality, not biography, not ideology, something prior. Across the Western esoteric lineages, this operation appears again and again. In the old Hermetic writings attributed to the mythical sage thrice great, purification is described as a return, a remembering of what the soul is beneath its entanglements, a knowledge that cannot be collected like trivia, only uncovered by removing what obstructs it. A Renaissance physician mystic, often dismissed as eccentric by his enemies, insisted that destruction is not the enemy of creation, it is the entrance to it. To burn away corruption is to prepare a space where a truer form can be born. And centuries later, the depth psychologist who treated alchemy as a map of the inner world would say the same in different language, that the flames are not outside you, they are the pressure of honesty within you. That psychologist was Adrian Keller, who recognized alchemical fire as a symbol of a psychological fact. The ego cannot be transformed gently. It must be confronted. Calcination is the collision between self-image and reality, the moment consciousness meets what it has refused to see. The shadow, as Keller named it, is not only your darkness, it is everything you left out of the story you tell about yourself. But the tradition goes further than psychology. A later Hermetic commentator, writing on the Emerald Axiom, defined calcination as the breaking of attachment itself, the slow execution of the inner tyrant that demands comfort, validation, and control. It is the death of unconscious grasping. And this is why the fire phase is always first. Because nothing else is possible while the false self still negotiates the terms of truth. Here the old Gnostic Christians whisper something unsettling. Salvation is not earned through obedience, but through awakening. Not blind belief, but direct knowing. The fire becomes discernment, burning away illusion until the inner spark is seen clearly, not as an idea, but as lived reality. The world does not hand you truth. It demands that you become capable of holding it. And this is the uncompromising premise. The great secret is not hidden in lost libraries or locked behind initiatic titles. It is concealed inside the architecture of your own mind. The obstacle is not lack of information. It is excess identity. The work is not accumulation, but subtraction, not building, but precise demolition. Calcination creates a productive absence, a clean space where what is real can finally be heard. To understand how this works, you must see the system it belongs to. Inner alchemy is not random mysticism. It is a structured philosophy of transformation, expressed through symbolic operations. At its core stand three principles: the fire essence, the fluid essence, and the form essence. They are not chemicals, but forces present in everything matter, psyche, spirit. Fire essence is the active spark, will, desire, intensity, the drive that dares to change. Fluid essence is the messenger, adaptability, intelligence, the power of movement between states. Form essence is the structure, the hardened shape your life takes, habits, self-concepts, unquestioned assumptions. Mental calcination targets this last one. It attacks the crust, the rigid forms that pretend to be you, but were mostly installed: education, culture, trauma, repetition. The fire does not destroy your life. It destroys what is dead in it. Form essence is the inner stonework of identity. It is what makes your world feel stable, but also what makes you predictable. It crystallizes into reflex, how you interpret events, what you assume people mean, what you call normal. Most of it is never examined, and because it is unexamined, it rules you. Calcination applies fire essence-focused will to these hardened structures until they begin to soften. When a belief is heated long enough, it stops behaving jixying itself as truth and becomes visible as a shape you've been living inside. The moment you can observe the belief, it is already weakening. It is becoming fluid, essence, mobile consciousness again, able to change form, able to evolve. This triad echoes through many traditions. In the mystical diagrams of the Kabbalists, existence is balanced between force and expansion, restraint and mercy, until harmony emerges. In Neoplatonic thought, reality descends from the one into mind, then soul, then matter, and the spiritual journey reverses that descent by purification and ascent. In the Rosicrucian mythos, the old self must die so the new self can resurrect. These are different dialects describing the same engine. Transformation requires structured annihilation. Without the fire, nothing becomes real. You cannot clarify what you refuse to break, but the attitude required for this cannot be casual. Calcination is not a mood. It is a discipline. A 19th century occult philosopher wrote that real power begins with directed will, not wishing, not hoping, but a sustained ability to aim consciousness like a blade. Without this, the fire becomes chaos, crisis without meaning, destruction without rebirth. Equally important is preparation of character. A classical esoteric historian warned that the mysteries were never given to the ethically unready, not because the knowledge is dangerous, like a weapon, but because it amplifies what already exists inside you. If your motive is vanity, calcination becomes self-torture. If your motive is domination, insight becomes manipulation. The fire reveals the operator. So an ethic of truth must be built alongside will, the commitment to follow inquiry wherever it leads, even when it humiliates you, even when it costs you belonging, even when it burns away the identity you used to survive. This is why doubt is sacred here. Not cynical doubt, but disciplined skepticism. You question authority, tradition, and even your own experiences. Yet you remain loyal to investigation itself. This paradox, radical doubt in service of absolute truth, is the Hermetic stance. The flame burns not only false beliefs, but premature certainty. If you cannot let your conclusions die, you cannot be reborn. This is why the process is sequential. Each alchemical operation depends on what came before it. Calcination is not a nice introduction. It is the foundation. Without breakdown, there is nothing to purify. Without separation, there is nothing to integrate. Without the fire, every later stage becomes spiritual decoration. New ideas painted over the old prison. Mental calcination unfolds through recognizable stages, not as theory, but as lived terrain. The first is the recognition of falsity. It often begins with an unsettling discovery. You do not know what you thought you knew. More precisely, you notice that much of what you call your values, reactions, preferences, even your morality, may be internalized programming. This realization rarely arrives politely. A relationship collapses and exposes patterns you denied. A career breaks apart and reveals you were performing someone else's dream. Or smaller contradictions accumulate until the psyche can no longer maintain the illusion. Something in you begins to ask, who chose this? And the answer is uncomfortable. You may not be author, but character, not origin, but outcome. This destabilizes identity. Anxiety rises because the floor has cracked. Yet this fracture is the opening. The fire has found dry wood. At this stage, the skill is negative capability, remaining in uncertainty without grabbing closure. You do not rush to patch the hole. You widen it until truth can pass through. Stage 2 is the confrontation with the rejected self. As the false layers weaken, what was buried begins to surface. The shadow is not merely bad traits. It is everything you refuse to integrate. Rage you called righteousness. Fear you called logic. Envy you disguised as criticism. It contains cruelty where you advertised kindness, cowardice where you claimed strength, manipulation where you insisted on purity. This stage is painful because it collapses moral theater. You see the gap between who you perform and who you are. Even more disturbing, you realize some of your highest ideals may have been reaction formations. Extreme virtue used to suppress opposite impulses. The fire burns through projection. You can no longer pretend your problems originate only in other people, bad luck, or the world. The discovery is not self-hatred. It is self-knowledge. It is the difference between guilt and clarity. Calcination does not ask you to condemn yourself, but to stop lying about yourself. There are dangers here. One is retreat, rebuilding ego defenses and calling it healing. The other is collapse, mistaking the shadow's revelation for total worthlessness. The practitioner must hold opposites without splitting, acknowledging the darkness while refusing to drown in it. This is the inner function that creates transformation, tension held consciously, long enough for a third thing to emerge. The flame is harsh, but it is fair. It burns illusion, not essence. Stage 3 is the burning of attachments. Once the shadow is partially integrated, the fire turns to dependency. Everything you need to feel like you exist, comfort, approval status, control, even suffering can become an attachment if it grants identity. You begin to see that much of daily life is organized around avoiding discomfort and preserving a self-image. These attachments are not only material, they cling to relationships, ideologies, roles, and narratives. You stop asking, "What do I believe?" and start asking, "What fear forces me to believe this? What emptiness is being covered? What pain is being negotiated? What would remain if this attachment dissolved?" Here the Gnostics offer a razor. The world of appearances is powered by sleep, and sleep is maintained through craving, through the unconscious bargain that says, "I will not wake up fully if I can keep this comfort." Calcination breaks the bargain. It intensifies awareness until the addiction to certainty begins to fail. Relationships become crucibles. You notice how often love was actually role play, codependency, unspoken contracts, shared denial. This does not always mean abandonment, but it does mean the death of the false version of the relationship. Many connections cannot survive truth because they were built to protect illusion, not to meet reality. When attachments burn, the ego panics. It calls the emptiness loss. But the emptiness is the beginning. The raw inner substance can finally be reached. Stage 4 is reduction to essence. Something strange happens when enough burns away. You begin to see what cannot burn. Beneath conditioning, beneath the shadow, beneath attachment and performance, a quality of awareness remains, not a personal story, not an identity. A presence, a simple fact of being conscious. The old Hermetic texts spoke of an inner spark, something divine not in a religious sense, but in the sense of being prior to all manufactured meaning. The depth psychologists described it differently. Not the ego, but the larger organizing center of the psyche. The point is the same. This essence is not created through work. It is revealed by removing what obscures it. But this triggers an epistemological crisis. If everything you called ME was constructed, what is this awareness that recognizes construction? If every belief can be doubted, what remains when doubt itself is observed? The practitioner confronts the recursive mystery of consciousness examining itself. The observer cannot be fully objectified because it is the condition of all objects. Yet it is undeniably present. Philosophers touched this terrain when they said, "I think, therefore I am." But calcination burns deeper. The thinking can be watched. The thoughts are not the proof. The proof is the watching itself. Not I think, but I am, simple amness, bare presence without story. This is not fantasy. It is the irreducible remainder. The gold is not a thing you gain. It is what survives when everything false is removed. Stage 5 is the interregnum of emptiness. Once the false self has been dismantled and the essential has been glimpsed, there is often a bleak interval. The old structures are gone, but the new have not formed. Meaning feels thin. Motivation collapses. Life appears staged, artificial, almost absurd. This is the inner blackening, the psychological night where the ego has died, but ego transcendence has not stabilized. This phase is dangerous because it invites desperate reconstruction. The mind wants familiar defenses back. It wants a tribe, a certainty, a label, anything to stop the freefall. But if you grasp too quickly, you rebuild the same prison with different DD core. Here, many confuse the process with pathology. Yet there is a difference. Clinical depression often narrows perception and deadens possibility. This crisis, by contrast, is exposure to much seen at once, too much falsity revealed. The light is not missing, it is unbearable. The correct posture is not frantic action, and not passive collapse, but active passivity, staying awake while letting the transformation unfold. Ancient texts describe this as the sign of true death, the black bird appearing in the vessel, the proof that dissolution is real. If you can endure this without fleeing, the emptiness becomes fertile. The chaos begins to reorganize. This is the hidden test. Can you remain without identity? Can you exist without performance? Can you tolerate not knowing who you are long enough for something truer to emerge? Those who can will discover the emptiness was not absence, it was space. And space is what truth requires. Stage 6 is the emergence of new structure. If the fire has been endured with rigor, something begins to form, not as a return to the old identity, but as a quieter, cleaner organization of the self. This is the whitening, clarified consciousness, less reactive, more spacious, able to hold complexity without collapsing into fear or certainty. The new self is not ego triumphant. It is ego in service. The functional personality still exists. You still speak, choose, work, love. But you no longer confuse those functions with essence. Identity becomes a tool rather than a prison. You can step into roles without being swallowed by them. This creates a rare kind of freedom, commitment without clinging. You can care deeply without making your care into a fragile idol. You can act decisively without needing to be right forever. You can hold values without turning them into armor. The old self was unconsciously inhabited. The new self is consciously held. This is what inner alchemy offers, not the removal of structure, but liberation within structure, the ability to participate fully in form while remaining rooted in what precedes form. You are no longer driven by the frantic need to prove existence through achievement, approval, or control. Instead, action begins to align with something more central: truth. But within calcination, there is still a deeper threshold, a moment of absolute crisis that cannot be avoided. A narrow passage where the fire does not merely challenge you, it empties you. This is where most seekers quit, and where true transformation begins. This threshold is the true dark night, the moment when enough has burned that you cannot return to old illusions. But you also cannot yet live from the new foundation. You are suspended in existential freefall, and every survival instinct screams that this was a catastrophic mistake. Its first symptom is groundlessness. The supports that held your life, morality, relationships, ambition, belief, reveal themselves as constructed, not false in a childish sense, but contingent, arbitrary, assembled. Convictions that once felt sacred now appear as cultural inheritance or psychological compensation. Work that once gave meaning is exposed as distraction from an inner void. The existential philosophers named this nausea, the absurd being toward death. But where their path often ends in defiance, inner alchemy treats this crisis as transitional. It is not a final verdict, but a furnace. The old self cannot pass through intact. Only what is essential fits. Psychologically, what collapses here is the persona, the mask you wore for society and for yourself. The ego tries to rebuild it, but fails because the materials have been reduced to ash. You cannot go back because you know too much, and you cannot build new defenses because you can see defenses as defenses. What separates this from breakdown is containment. The practitioner has entered intentionally, guided by a framework, held inside a vessel of practice. Without a vessel, the fire destroys. Inside a vessel, it transforms. This is chosen dissolution, not accidental collapse. Painful, yes, but purposeful. And if endured, it becomes initiation. The purpose of this suffering is not cruelty. It is separation. Just as ore must be heated until metal divides from dross, consciousness must be exposed to existential fire until essence separates from illusion. This is the logic the modern world often refuses to accept. Not all distress is malfunction. Some is development. Some darkness is incubation. But discernment matters. Productive crisis has markers. Awareness remains present even in chaos. Reality testing remains intact. Self-care is still possible. Beneath the confusion, there is a sense of process movement even when direction is unclear. When these are absent, when the fire becomes pure fragmentation, intervention is required. The old traditions understood this. The mysteries are not entertainment, and approaching them prematurely can cause harm. For those prepared, the crisis teaches a terrifying freedom. You can endure what you believed would annihilate you. Identity becomes visibly fluid. Meaning becomes portable. You learn that consciousness is vaster than any mood, any role, any narrative. The flame that seemed only destructive reveals itself as purifying. Emergence from the dark night is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. The world has not changed, but your relationship to it has. You stop chasing ultimate meaning because you have touched what precedes meaning. You stop defending identities because you have seen what witnesses all identities. The frantic demand for answers weakens. In its place appears something more stable than certainty, comfort with uncertainty. This is the philosopher's goal, not an object acquired, but a quality of being. The stone is not a substance that changes matter, but a state of consciousness that changes your relationship to existence itself, and that change has consequences practical, daily, undeniable. A calcinated psyche has recognizable traits. The first is transparent identity. You still function as a person, but you no longer mistake the role for the actor. You can participate without being possessed, engage without clinging, commit without collapsing into obsession. You know you are wearing an identity, and because you know it, you can wear it fully without fear. Second is stability. Challenges that once felt catastrophic now register as disturbances, not annihilations. Not because you suppress emotion, but because your center has moved. You are anchored in something deeper than validation, status, or control. Choices become less about maximizing comfort and more about alignment with what is true. Third is ethical clarity, not rigid commandments, but clean perception. When projection burns away, you see more accurately. You harm less because you recognize interconnection. You become responsible because you are awake. Inner alchemy never grants exemption. It demands integrity. The more you see, the less you can pretend. And in modern life, this becomes power. You navigate polarization and noise without being recruited into panic. Relationships become encounters, not bargains. Work becomes expression, not compensation. You can endure necessary difficulty without martyrdom, while still resisting needless suffering. This is what the fire phase offers, not escape from the world, but a new way to inhabit it, awake, flexible, and real. The gold was never in the books, the symbols, or the performance of wisdom. It was in the will to face the flame. Because the flame does not ask what you know, it asks what you are willing to lose, so that truth can remain.